later hours without having the urgency to bypass it. But let me tell you, though, this government, though, is far worse than even that first term National. There's been multiple things they have rammed through, not just late hours.
Lila says kind of equal with the extended hours. Lila?
Yeah, so, I mean, they've got a lot of work to do, and some of us would like to see them doing a bit more work, so bring it on.
Yeah, but extended hours are fine. I don't care they sit late, but do not bypass select committees.
All right. We could chat more about that. Anyway, for now, David Farah and Lila Haere, thank you both so much for being with us on the panel today. I'm Wallace Chaplin. I am back tomorrow, 3:45, Wednesday. Till then, bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, a cleaner at Auckland Airport tests positive for COVID just a day after the Trans-Tasman bubble takes off. We're live with the latest. A former inmate takes prison operator Serco to court alleging inhumane treatment. The government's deal to buy Ihumatao is deemed unlawful. Winston Peters is back in court, that is, over his superannuation overpayment privacy case. The US police officer accused of murdering George Floyd is now in the hands of the jury. Aussie tourism operators on the Bonza bonus of Kiwis who can fly, and the council that has landed one in the rough over a proposal to bulldoze a Rotorua golf course.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The Prime Minister says the latest community case of COVID-19 is a reminder that there is still a small chance those vaccinated can contract the coronavirus. Jacinda Ardern says the border worker who was reported positive this afternoon cleans planes which arrive from red zone countries. Ms Ardern says the worker was vaccinated.
It's a reminder of why at the border, even though we have vaccinated workers, we still are testing them and we're still asking them to follow all of the usual protocols because it is still possible to get COVID-19.
Jacinda Ardern says the latest case was picked up in routine testing and is asymptomatic. She says the case is unlikely to derail the just-opened Trans-Tasman bubble. The Australian Department of Health says at this stage there is no change to current travel arrangements. The union for the Auckland Airport worker who tested positive for COVID-19 says it's important the public do not put blame on that individual. Air2 Union Head of Aviation Savage says the virus is difficult to contain, but the public should be reassured that there are very good health and safety regulations in place. The Auditor-General has found the government's purchase of the land at Ihumatao is illegal because the money used didn't get the right approvals. A new act will now have to be passed to validate the payment and make the deal legal. Mariana Johnson reports.
The investigation came after complaints from National and the ACT parties that the government used money from the Land for Housing Fund to purchase Ihumatao for almost $30 million. The Auditor-General's office did not have any concerns about that aspect of the deal, but it did find spending was not appropriated as it should have been because the right approvals were not sought when the government set up the new fund. The Prime Minister has rejected any assertion the government's purchase of the land is illegal, saying it was always clear the land was going to be used for housing. Ko Mariana Johnson, DNA.
A lawyer representing Winston Peters has criticised top public servants for handing over private information to ministers. Before the 2017 election, information relating to a superannuation overpayment was leaked to the media. While a High Court judgment found Mr Peters did have his privacy breached, the case failed because no one was found responsible for the leak. Mr Peters' appeal started today and his lawyer Brian Henry argued a privacy breach occurred when the ministers were briefed.
All they're doing in our submission is providing to a minister salacious information that the minister can do nothing with and does not assist the minister in the administration of MSD.
But the Crown has refuted this and says the public servants wanted to ensure the integrity of the public service. A Minneapolis jury has adjourned for the night after considering its verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer charged with murdering George Floyd. America is bracing for the outcome of the case that is seen as a pivotal moment in race relations and policing. The BBC's Barbara Pletasha reports.
The judge handed the case of George Floyd's death to the jury after a full day of closing statements. The prosecution argued that Derek Chauvin had to know he was squeezing the life out of Mr. Floyd, who cried repeatedly that he couldn't breathe and finally fell silent with Mr. Chauvin's knee still on his neck. The defence attorney contended that it was a dynamic and fluid situation, with Mr. Floyd initially resisting arrest, and that Mr. Chauvin did what any reasonable police officer would have deemed necessary. He also contended that his client's actions were not the main cause of death, urging jurors to consider Mr. Floyd's drug use and heart problems.
Barbara Pletasha in Minneapolis. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. Most of the Black Caps have now received their first COVID-19 vaccination ahead of their trip to England for the World Test Championship final in June. Fast bowler Neil Wagner received his first injection in Tauranga today, meaning 15 of the 20-strong squad have been vaccinated. 4 players already at the Indian Premier League left too early for the vaccine, while another is in the UK playing county cricket. The Black Caps who leave for England next month are receiving early access to the vaccine under the government's Reasons of National Significance category. Wagner is pleased to have received his first shot.
For a guy who's extremely scared of needles, I was pretty happy with it. It was quite easy and feeling really good. So I had a training session straight after, and obviously grateful for the government for helping us out to be able to have that peace of mind where we can get a jab and go over and be safe.
Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp remains opposed to the idea of a European Football Super League despite his club agreeing to join it. The Reds are one of 12 clubs who are part of the proposed new competition. Liverpool drew 1-1 with Leeds today, with fans protesting outside Elland Road, including burning a Liverpool shirt.
I'm absolutely disgusted and horrified by it. I don't think it's right for football, and I think it's taken away the spirit of football, and it's just money grabbing.
I think it's not right for football. The history of the teams, the fans and everything like that, it's not taken into consideration, and money is at the heart of this decision.
Those who play in the new Super League have been threatened with being banned from the World Cup and European Champs. That's the news.
A former Exclusive Brethren member speaks.
The whole basis of their charitable status should be investigated. Should the public be funding an organisation that destroys families?
Passing the buck over flaws in transmission Gully.
Stephen Joyce writes a very long column in the weekend papers every weekend. You might like to drink this using the next one.
And Waka Kotahi woes in New Plymouth.
Instead of doing the designs that they consulted with the community on, they're now looking at some sort of a half-assed compromise.
Thorough reporting. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Rain spreading south today, heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Easing to showers tomorrow morning with fine breaks developing. For the rest of the North Island, also Marlborough, Nelson and Buller. Scattered rain spreading south today, tonight. Possibly heavy about Nelson, then turning to showers tomorrow with possible thunderstorms about the central North Island by tomorrow afternoon. Westland and Fiordland, cloud clearing tomorrow morning to fine weather, but showers continuing in Fiordland. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine with high cloud, a few showers developing in the south tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands fine today, cloudy tomorrow with rain developing around midday. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A cleaner at Auckland Airport has tested positive for COVID-19. The person tested positive during routine testing yesterday and was announced this afternoon. For more on this, we're joined by our reporter Nick Trubridge, who's at Auckland Airport. Nick, tell us, what do we know about this case so far?
Hi Lisa, well as you pointed out, this case is a cleaner, and in particular this was a cleaner who would board red zoned or flights from red zone countries, flights that had come from places like Dubai, the likes of those sorts of places, board those flights, clean the plane, and it seems that is where they've picked this virus up. Now, it's important to note that this worker had both of their vaccinations and that they are asymptomatic. The Prime Minister today went to great lengths to point out the fact that even when you are vaccinated, you can still obviously catch this virus. The idea, though, is that you don't have any symptoms, that you don't get really sick, and of course that worst case you don't die. Another point to make is that contact tracing is now underway. We should hopefully get an update on locations of interest later tonight or tomorrow morning.
So as you say, cleaning red zone flights, so flights coming in from high-risk countries. So does it affect the Trans-Tasman bubble at all?
Yeah, great question, Lisa. Obviously, we were here yesterday bringing you all those stories about happy reunions. Safe to say, though, well, lucky to say that it won't affect the Trans-Tasman bubble at this stage. Obviously, this is an individual who was operating in the red zone at the airport. As we've reported before, there are now two zones. There's the green zone behind me, where people from Australia come out as part of the bubble, and then the red zone is sort of a back route through the airport. So no reason to suspend the two-way bubble at this stage. We actually heard from the Australian Health Minister a little bit earlier this afternoon, and he expressed complete confidence in the system operating in New Zealand. So no cause for concern at the moment. You can still jump on that flight to Sydney or on that flight the other way back home from places like Melbourne, Brisbane and Sydney.
Kia ora e hoa. Thanks, Nick. That is Nick Trubridge, our reporter at Auckland Airport there. It is 5:09 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come on the program, we're in Sydney to check in with tourist operators there, hoping Kiwi tourists will give them a helping hand. A former inmate is taking prison operator Serco to court, alleging it treated him in a degrading and inhumane way, something Serco categorically denies. Peter Rerikura, who has since been released, has spent a lot of time in jail. He was sentenced to 9.5 years for a string of crimes, including beating his daughter, along with traffic offences. He spent about a year in the Auckland South Corrections Facility that is operated by the private contractor Serco. While there, among other things, he claims he was subjected to repeated degrading strip searches, segregated without proper reason, required to defecate in front of guards and forced to clean himself up with his hands, with no water to wash afterwards. Now, with the help of another inmate, he's filed legal action. We might as well start with the large elephant in the room. Peter Rerikura has done some truly terrible things. Bashed his young daughter many times, kicked and punched her. For that, he served almost a decade behind bars. He knows he's up against it in the court of public opinion, and here's why he thinks you should care about what happens behind the wire.
Everyone deserves a chance in life. You know, everyone has rights. We do have love and caring in ourselves. You know, we have families that support us and come and see us. We have friends, we have partners, we have parents. You know, like, we've just all screwed up along the way, you know, but it doesn't mean that we can just close the door on us.
Peter Rerikura's allegations against Serco are laid out extensively in court documents. But here's the gist. On December 17th last year, his partner visited him at the jail. Peter was wearing overalls with a cable tie lock on the zip, compulsory attire for contact visits. It's important because Serco claims he was passed contraband when his partner touched his backside during the visit. Peter Rerikura says guards did 2 rub-down searches based on their suspicions. He was put in a holding cell and strip-searched twice in the presence of multiple officers and security cameras. He describes the drill in raw detail. Just a heads up, things are about to get pretty explicit.
They make you take your overalls off, and then whatever else is underneath, you take it down, take it all off, and then you pass it to them one item at a time. And then at the same time, they make you stand up against the wall, and then they once they feel that the clothing and that stuff that they're taking from you has got nothing on them, then they give them out to the next officers, and then they make you do a squat. And then when you do a squat, they tell you to bend right over so you can show them, because they want to see your asshole and where your balls are. And you got one officer down on his knees, at the back, and he's having trying to have a good look at whatever he's supposed to be looking for. And then from doing that, then they make you spin around, tell you to turn around, face them, and then you got to lift up your genitals and show them, that you've got nothing in there. And then you got to lift up your armpits and all that, like you're naked. So like the humiliation behind all that is just so you're like what are you looking for? And then at the same time, they are just like all standing there, and then they make you spin around again. And then you have to go down again. They make you do it like 3 times.
Peter Rerikura reckons the searches were excessive, degrading and without good cause. Nothing was found. After several hours, it was off to directed segregation in a dry cell. That's prison speak for solitary confinement in a Spartan room. Section 60 of the Corrections Act allows a prison manager to order an inmate to be segregated for medical oversight. More on that later. First, a walk through the cell.
Room that's got no toilet in there. It's got no drinking water in there. It's a concrete cell with just a concrete bed. It has a mattress inbuilt pillow, and the garment they give you is like one that I assume that goes on a mental patient. They give you a gown like that, and that's all they give you.
So, Peter, what happened when you needed to urinate?
They say to you to push a button. You got to push what they've got on the wall. They've got an emergency button. But you go along and push it, no one answers. So you're waiting for when they decide on when to come down or want to answer the intercom.
So when you buzz and they finally come and you need to urinate,
yes.
What do they give you and how are you supposed to do this?
They pass you in a piss bottle, and then they you put your piss in there, and then you pass it back to them. But at the same time, before they do that, they got to go get another officer. One officer can't do it. There has to be 2 or 3 officers has to be there. So you're passing your urine, you're doing it into the bottle. You got to stand in front of them. Everything you got to reveal to them. When you pass your urine back to them, they got a bag out there, and they all dressed up in headgear and gloves, and they got the full Monty on, the suit and all this stuff, thinking that that you're going to catch something. So they grab it all and then they put it in the bag and then they check in it.
In your statement of claim, it says that it was difficult to urinate into the container. So what happened?
Well, because you filled it up, and then your next minute, when you filled up the container, it pisses on the floor. So it's the bottle ain't big enough. The bottle they give you to urinate into.
So how do you clean that up, and how did you clean it up?
Well, how I had to clean it up the first time I had to do it was I had to wait for my dinner bread. Because I asked them, I said, I urinated all over the ground. And then they said to me, you're in this room and that's what happens. And I said, what happens? And then they say, we can't give you nothing. And I said, what? I said, so how do you clean up all this then? And they said, well, we're not giving you nothing. And I said, shit. So because I know dinner wasn't too far away. So I waited, and then they gave me my bread. Instead of eating my bread, that's because you get so much meals a day. Well, I use my bread as a mop to mop up my urinate. It's because, even though I'm inside a dirty, disgusting place like that, doesn't mean I want to, eat around my own urine, my own mumu.
So Peter, just to be clear, you had to use the bread that came with your meal to mop up the pee on the floor because nobody would give you anything to clean it up.
That's correct.
When it comes to number 2s, he was given a dish and told to lift his genitals while he did his business. Again, Peter Rerikura doesn't shy away from the detail.
I'm doing this shit in front of them. Most embarrassed. But, I'm just wanting to try and get this over and done with why they got me there and what they want. They're playing God with the toilet paper. So I end up having shit on my fingers. And I said, can I have something to wash my hands? And then they said, nope. And I'm like, I'm pissed off.
What did they tell you to do to clean your hands, Peter?
What? They just said, look, pass that container here, and they just shut the door. So what I did, I pissed on my hands. I used my own pistol to wash the shit off my hands.
Peter Rerikura claims he was targeted because he had other legal action pending against the prison operator Serco. Aside from this claim, Checkpoint is aware of several other cases against Serco, alleging mistreatment or abuses of prisoner rights. We asked, but Serco wouldn't say exactly how many there are. Peter Rerikura claims Serco didn't give him the legally required paperwork when they segregated him. During the 3 days he was in the dry cell, he claims he was denied ready access to his heart medication, and the cell door was kicked regularly, including in the night. Sleep torture, he reckons. Documents show Serco conducted 15-minute observations. How do you think they treated you? How would you describe it?
I will say that how can they be doing that and it's 2020? How could that be still happening in our jails, that they say that, they're there to care for the prisoners and everything else that comes with it, to rehabilitate them, to support them, to make them go back out into society to be good, men. But what they did to me on that day, it just brought up things to do with I just felt so disgusted, to be real honest with you. I just don't want to go back, if you can understand what I'm saying. This has taught me a lesson, put it like that, but a lesson that I don't want anyone else to go through.
Peter, did you feel humiliated?
Big time. Shame, embarrassed. They've got one thing up on me where they know that, I'm having a cry in the room because no one's around, and all this shit's going on. Just made me feel so belittled.
There are CCTV cameras all around the jail. Peter Rerikura says he's requested the relevant footage, but Serco hasn't handed it over. In response to Checkpoint's questions, Serco says actions must be recorded or witnessed by staff, but it won't say if any footage still exists. In the dry cell, soiled with faeces and urine, Peter Rerikura says he asked repeatedly for a shower and only got one on day 2 of his stay. But even in the presence of officers, he was left handcuffed, despite having a disability that he says he was mocked for.
You're handcuffed, that's how you take the shower. Like, they got to take your bath or they got to take your gown off. I can move my right arm up and down, but I can't open my fingers in it. Like, I had a chop through an accident. So
they wanted you to shower handcuffed with one hand that you can't properly use as well.
That's correct. And that's how I had to shower.
After 3 days and no contraband found, Peter Rerikura says he was returned to his normal wing. In a statement, Serco says it's vigorously defending the case. Contraband is a challenge facing all New Zealand prisons, and it has robust search, detection and deterrent process. And this about using dry cells.
The introduction of contraband through ingestion or secretion can have serious medical implications, and the paeki, man in our care, will be managed under Section 60 of the Corrections Act 2004. He will then be closely monitored by medical staff. Where we have grounds to suspect a substance has been ingested, we have a duty of care for the man's medical welfare, as well as an obligation to prevent the introduction of drugs and supply to others. Paeki will be placed in a dry cell until he has completed 3 motions or the contraband is recovered. These situations are difficult for both paeki and staff, given the processes required to ensure contraband is recovered and risk to both paeki and kohuora is minimised.
But Peter Rerikura maintains his time in the dry cell was 3 days of humiliation and degrading treatment, where he was made to feel like an animal. And he says that doesn't fit with Corrections' new hokairangi policy that's supposed to deliver great outcomes for Māori. That brings us a full circle back past the elephant. Peter Rerikura says the kind of treatment he alleges doesn't change prisoners or make them better people.
I don't believe that anybody is going to have a better chance or a better direction in life if a place like that is going to be doing what they are doing. Why will we have a law that states that we all have human rights? You know, the human rights law doesn't just say that it's only for the people who don't get into trouble.
And that case is expected to be heard next month, and as mentioned, Serco says it will vigorously defend the allegations. The government's Ihumatao deal has been deemed unlawful by the Auditor-General, and the Housing Minister, Megan Woods, ordered to please explain. The opposition has hammered the government over the spending, calling it a flagrant breach of trust. But Ms Woods says it's a mere technical error which will be tidied up next month. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
They've purchased the whenua from Fletcher's. Yeah!
December brought a long-awaited breakthrough, the government agreeing to purchase the disputed Ihumatao land of its owner Fletcher Building. Ministers hailed the $30 million deal as a triumph, a tidy end to a long-running deadlock. Or so they thought.
The government had a number of possibilities. This was the worst of them, and it's been proven so by the Auditor-General.
They have spent money illegally. They seem to feel that the rules don't apply to them.
Both National and ACT fired off letters in the announcement's aftermath asking the Auditor-General to look into the funding. Today, the watchdog ruled the payment unlawful, saying officials failed to get proper sign-off from Parliament. ACT's leader David Seymour says it's a serious breach.
Parliament did not legislate expenditure for this purpose. The Minister of Finance was told officially by the Treasury he could not spend money on this purpose. He did it anyway. Actually, in any other government, you'd expect people to resign.
The government has been ordered to make it right. The Housing Minister, Megan Woods, will have to front up in Parliament and explain the mistake, then pass retrospective legislation making the payment legal. But she says it's not a big deal.
This is a technical error that happens from time to time, but it's not unusual. This happened 71 times in the last 5 years of the previous government, totaling $500 million. It certainly isn't the way anyone strives to do things, but it does happen.
Neither opposition party is satisfied. Not National's finance spokesperson, Michael Woodhouse.
They're going to retrospectively make it lawful, which is the worst type of law.
And not Mr Seymour.
We want to trust our government. We want a country united in challenging times. But if you can't look after the pennies, then the pounds are going to create huge trouble.
The minister says she's seeking official advice, but intends to fix the mistake during the May budget process. It's not a good look for the government. A messy end to a messy saga. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Homai o whakaaro, you can send that feedback to us via text on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Accusations of propaganda destroying taonga and jeopardising people's mental and spiritual health, all par for the course at a meeting over the future of Rotorua's Springfield Golf Course. A Rotorua Lakes Council proposal could see the 70-year-old course absorbed into a new recreation precinct that would also include housing. The plan follows a 2018 analysis that found Rotorua's sports fields were of an unacceptable quality and unable to cope with future demand. Local democracy reporter Felix Demare was at last night's meeting and told me via Skype most of the people there were opposed to the plan.
We had one person who said that they're suffering ongoing anxiety about the proposal, that their property is devalued by it, and another person who said they're having nightmares about bulldozers. And one person, Didi Kusabs, is the leader of the Saving Springfield Facebook page, and she had some very interesting comments to make.
How dare you? How dare you hatch such a despicable proposal? How dare you even consider the destruction of this taonga? How dare you conspire to obliterate any of these important oxygen-giving 70-year-old heritage trees? How dare you try to snatch the habitat and hunting grounds of our beautiful native wildlife. How dare you jeopardise the physical, mental, financial and spiritual well-being of the people of Rotorua.
Well, there's no denying or confusing how she felt about the situation. Can you just give us a bit of a sense? I mean, how many people were there and how would you kind of describe the vibe of the meeting?
Well, there were about 150 people there. One of the organisers said 170, but I thought that might have been a little bit over. And the general vibe was a lot of antagonism towards the council. One person stood up asking why the council staff were taking the flak instead of the mayor and councillors. We had several of those in attendance as well. But most of it was about opposition to the proposal.
So why is the council floating this development anyway? What's their reasoning behind it? And did anyone speak for it?
Nobody spoke overtly for it, except perhaps the council, but it was more in terms of making sure that the community knew that it is just a proposal at the moment. And so they were at pains to emphasise that it is just a proposal and that it will go out to community consultation before any decisions are made. But they did make the point that the sports fields in Rotorua are in a particularly poor condition at the moment. So they did an analysis in 2018 and found that most of them were in an unacceptable condition.
What is so special about this particular golf course? Because I did a quick Google, right? You've got a few in Rotorua, you're not short of golf courses, and housing is a massive issue, and this proposal would include some housing. So what's so special about this golf course?
Well, I had a bit of a yarn to a guy at the meeting just before it started. He's been a member for about 20 years. And he says that there's something special about that golf course in particular because it's a more friendly place to come, in his view. And it's also a better golf course for the average golfer. So none of this pro business, and it allows people who are beginners to sort of get their start.
So what about the housing element, Felix? Because we're hearing a lot from Rotorua at the moment about how absolutely, well, motels are heaving at the seams with people in transitional housing. There's no doubt, again, that you need housing in that area. Did anyone mention the housing and whether that would be of benefit?
I didn't hear a heck of a lot of that, to be honest. It has been acknowledged that it is part of it, and some people did say that it would benefit Rotorua for housing to be on that site. And the council, based on their designs, it looks like about 150 houses could be built. So it's no small number of houses, and we could really do with that. But there weren't a lot of people at that meeting who favoured it in that respect.
If you had to sum it up, how would you say these people feel about their golf course?
They're frustrated and they're anxious, and I think they're sceptical about the process before them. Whether or not that is fair or not remains to be seen.
And that was local democracy reporter Felix Demare speaking from the Rotorua Daily Post newsroom. I'm really interested in your thoughts on this one. Text us on 2101, tweet us at @CheckpointRNZ, right? So should they get rid of the golf course that he was talking about, Springfield, and build some houses on it and some other rec areas? Or do you need the golf course that much? Let us know your thoughts. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Christchurch woman dealing with cancer, chemo and the hunt for a permanent home. The odds of a devastating quake striking the South Island over the next 50 years has more than doubled. And Winston Peters heads back to court over his superannuation privacy case. Let us know your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program so far this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at @CheckpointRNZ, or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
Australia's Health Minister Greg Hunt says the latest positive case here won't mean a change to Trans-Tasman travel rules. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the vaccinated border worker who was reported positive this afternoon cleans planes that arrive from red zone countries. Mr Hunt says his government has full confidence in New Zealand's health system. The Auditor-General has found the government's purchase of the land at Ihumatao is illegal because the money used didn't get the right approvals. A new act Congress will now have to be passed to validate the payment and make the deal legal. The Crown has defended the actions of top public servants for briefing former ministers about personal information regarding Winston Peters. A Court of Appeal hearing began today over the leaking of Mr Peters' superannuation overpayments to the media in 2017. A High Court judgment found no one was found responsible for the leak. The case failed. The National Party is standing by its role in the Transmission Gully project, despite a scathing review that found it was set up to fail. The review by the Infrastructure Commission found the maximum price the government would pay was set too low. Transmission Gully was the first motorway in New Zealand to be delivered under a PPP model set up under the national government in 2012. A Minneapolis jury has adjourned for the night after considering its verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer charged with murdering George Floyd. The legal team for Mr Chauvin, who knelt on Mr Floyd's neck for about 9 minutes until he died, argued in its closing statement that he acted as a reasonable officer. The prosecution says he murdered the unarmed black man to protect his pride and ego. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It is time for the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Hey, Nicholas, NZME's got a bit of a telling off. From who?
Yeah, this is from the NZX Market Disciplinary Tribunal. And that's, they were censored, which has effectively been told off, and penalised $100,000 for breaching stock exchange rules around the disclosure of sensitive information. So just as a piece of context, that all listed companies have to disclose any information that may move the value of its share price to investors, and all of this is about ensuring that the investment market is fully, fairly and equally informed. Those three factors are all interlinked in many respects, but NZME, they breached several market rules last year. Chief among them was the release of misleading information relating to the company's failed bid to acquire Stuff. Now, on May 11th last year, the company gave the impression that its bid to acquire the company from its Australian parent, Nine Entertainment, was well underway and was just awaiting government approval to let the two companies effectively merge. But that announcement gave no indication that the deal was likely to actually fall over. And that's because NZME had been notified by Nine, a couple of days before, that it had received a rival offer from Stuff's chief executive, Sinead Boucher, to buy the company, and that offer didn't necessarily face the same sort of regulatory challenges that NZME's sort of bid had. So following that announcement, NZME's shares actually leapt 14% on the previous trading price. And later that day, Nine Entertainment went out on the ASX and said, we stopped talking to this company a week ago. The negotiations at that point had fallen over. So for this, the tribunal, they censored the company, told them off and ordered it to pay $80,000 for the breach. But that's not the only thing the company's been pulled up on. It was also censored and penalised $20,000 for failing to notify the market promptly about the abrupt resignation of its chairperson last year. It was an abrupt resignation maybe 15 minutes before its annual general meeting. And sudden moves like that, they can actually move a company's share price. And because the resignation was made effective immediately, the tribunal found that NZME sort of breached its duties because it took nearly 3 hours to notify the market about that decision. So in a statement, NZME says it acted on the advice on the disclosures and takes the rules seriously, but it accepts the findings and the penalties.
Wow, that was a pretty serious relegation to the naughty corner. Okay, and there are calls for the government to rethink migration settings, and this is coming from the Productivity Commission.
Yeah, this has sort of been a common theme in recent days with the opening of our border with Australia. A number of experts and organisations have sort of come out and said that COVID-19 has sort of thrown up a rare opportunity to reorient, redesign parts of our economy for the better. One recent example that we covered was the tourism sector. We spoke to an expert in that field who says, we've had so much focus on sort of just, getting as much money through the door as possible, bringing as much sort of, tourists as possible, but we've sort of neglected sort of the, how we can benefit communities and the environment. And today we've had the Productivity Commission making similar calls, saying that, this is a once in a generation opportunity to redesign our migration policy settings. And it's based its analysis on some research that's done by the Institute of Economic Research. It's off the view that, bringing permanent migrants into this country, we've largely got that part of our sort of regulatory settings correct. There are still large parts of our labour market which are facing skills shortages. We do need to import talent from overseas. One example that's often used is IT professionals. We just lack them across the board. But the real area for redress, it says, which hasn't been touched on for decades, is those settings around temporary and low-skilled workers, where these workers in our labour force have actually significantly increased over the past 20 years. And the report says, I guess the question that the Productivity Commission is asking is how much we want our economy to be sort of orientated or revolved around low-skilled and low-paid workers. Its report says that there is actually little good evidence that increases in these workers are actually boosting productivity, longer-term productivity for our economy, which is essentially bang for buck. It uses the example of the horticultural sector. Its size has increased, but its productivity hasn't. And that's off the view that the government needs to sort of review these policy settings. And one step, it says, is to slowly close the door to these low-skilled, low-paid workers over time.
OK, let's take a quick trot around the market.
Yeah, we had a really late rally on the NZX this afternoon. It was sort of hovering around 3-month lows, but then it sort of came back with a huge surge and finished the day down 89 points to 12,679. The dollar is at 72.1 US cents and 92.5 Australian.
Ngā mihi mō te rā. Thanks, Nicholas. That's Nicholas Poynton with business news there. Now, we've got some breaking news, an update from the Ministry of Health about today's new border case. If you're just joining us, the Ministry has announced an Auckland Airport worker has tested positive for COVID. The Ministry of Health says there is a clear link to the border as the source of the infection. The person works as a cleaner, cleaning planes that have flown internationally from countries where COVID-19 is widespread. The person is currently isolating at home while they're being interviewed by health officials, and following this, they will be transferred to the Auckland quarantine facility. 5 household contacts have been tested and have returned negative results. The ministry has identified that the person has 16 close contacts. That's 16 close contacts. It says this number will likely change as further scoping of this person's movements identifies other people that they've been in close contact with. Now, they work at Auckland Airport is their sole employment, and their role is non-public facing, as they put it in the ministry. Additional pop-up testing has been set up at Auckland Airport this afternoon. This is in addition to the testing site that is already running at the airport. There are 3 locations of interest. Westfield St Luke's Food Court on Saturday between 12:15pm and 2:30pm. So that one again, Westfield St Luke's Food Court, Saturday between 12:15pm and 2:30pm. Bunnings New Lynn on Saturday between 2:30 and 3:50. Movenpick Dominion Road on Saturday between 5:15 to 7:20pm. People who are at those places are considered casual contacts who should monitor their health and be aware of any symptoms of COVID-19. And if you want to check up on those places, those locations of interest, they'll be up on the Ministry of Health website. Sydney tourism operators are over the moon to be welcoming back New Zealanders taking advantage of the quarantine-free travel arrangement. Our tourism reporter Tess Brunton and videographer Simon Rogers are in Sydney, and they filed this report.
The touchdown of flights from New Zealand didn't just bring relief for those reuniting with family and friends. Tourism operators have the visitors in their sights too. Darren Levine runs Sydney Tours R Us and Melbourne Private Tours, which are both honed in to the international market. He says it's been a tough year.
It's a big momentum lift. It's because you're going from no international people to where everything's empty and there's no tourists around to some new faces and some new accents and just some nice new people, and just great to get business again. Good to get wheels on the road again, and it's a lift for spirits of the whole tourism community.
But he's optimistic the visitors from across the ditch will bring in more business.
I think there's got to be some pent-up demand in New Zealand as there is in Australia for travelling. I mean, we're going mad living on our own little island, not being able to get out of here. So I'm sure there'll be couples and families who just want to go overseas and check out Australia and just see what it's like to travel again. So of course there will be families and friends, and even they would like to be travelling. They might like days out.
Soaking in the sights of Sydney on top of the Harbour Bridge is a key attraction in the city. Bridge Climb Sydney Group Chief Financial Officer Deb Zimmer says the past year has been very challenging.
We had a pretty rocky start. Obviously, we had to close for 3 months. We were shut from March to June. Then we started to reopen, but just shorter days. We used to be open every day of the week, and then we started opening 3 days a week. We're just about to start opening 5. So we're stepping it up gradually, but it's been very hard for us. We've had a lot of staff who've had to leave us because they just can't afford to be here working less hours with us.
Bridge climb punters were 80% international, but she says Australians have been getting behind them. Now Deb Zimmer is hopeful to see more New Zealanders on the bridge and says they've gone from opening 3 to 5 days a week.
We used to have a lot of Kiwis come and climb the bridge, particularly with their families, or when they were coming over for a holiday, they'd add this on, and people who live in Sydney want to show off their city to their relatives. So we're really hoping this is the start of the light at the end of the tunnel. So it'd be great to welcome even more New Zealanders back. They're great to climb with. They love a bit of adventure, always good humoured. So and they don't mind 4 seasons in one day in the weather. So we'd love to see more of them.
While it's unclear how many travellers will be coming across the ditch, there's a lot of hope here in Sydney that the Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge may play a bit of a drawing card for those in Aotearoa. Paddle Pirates runs kayaking trips out of Blackwattle Bay into Sydney Harbour. It was closed for most of last year, but its chief guide, Matt Bazina, is running tours again and also offering fitness-focused trips with his dog Colo on board. He's operating at about 25% of normal pre-COVID levels.
During the week, especially the Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, is still nowhere near what it used to be. No internationals. Most of my big days are weekends now because of the locals. But hopefully if people are actually specifically coming on holidays, which this is bringing them, I'm hoping that that's going to fill up those midweek tours which haven't really recovered since COVID. In the boat. Sit. Good boy. Stay there, good fella. Oh, he's a good boy. Thank you. On you, skipper.
He says Kiwis have always been a strong market for the business.
We like to have New Zealanders because, just quietly, they always get the job done. They're good paddlers.
Darren Levin hopes New Zealanders will make the most of Australian hospitality.
The New Zealanders should know how welcome they are in Australia and how much we miss them. We do give each other a bit of banter back and forth, but at the end of the day, you guys are our neighbours and we love you, and come on back anytime. You're very welcome there.
While it's early days for the quarantine-free bubble, Sydney tourism operators say they're ready to roll out the welcome mat and say g'day to their cousins across the Tasman. In Sydney for Checkpoint, Cortez Brunton, Tane.
And if you were listening to that on radio, we will put the video from Simon and Tessa's piece up on our Facebook page. And let's get to your feedback now. Earlier in the program, we were talking to local democracy reporter Felix Desmarais. Now, this was about a golf course, the Springfield Golf Course in Rotorua, and a proposal to potentially get rid of it, replace it with housing, and also, more sports facilities. Boy, oh boy, this has got you fired up. Graham's got in touch to say Danny Lee is a member of Springfield. He grew up and learned the game there. Someone else has got in touch to say we have a similar debate over the Berhampore course in Wellington would make a great housing area. Haere has got in touch via Twitter saying the golf course is one of many in Rotorua. I grew up with it as my backyard, but I would prefer it went to housing than for those few with the income and means to play a game of golf. Homeless children or one less golf course, says Haere. Ryan also on Twitter says the reason people don't want Springfield Golf Course to go is because it is a wealthy area and residents don't want to lose their views. It's bonkers that public land is being used for 100 or so golfers instead of thousands of sports players and much needed homes for whānau. Keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101. A Christchurch woman with cancer has a massive hurdle to get through, and it's not just chemo, but finding a home to live in. Crystal Brown has been staying in a sleep out and needs a bigger place to accommodate family who'll be caring for her. Struggling to find a home and battling the disease has been a major challenge, but she's determined to face it head on and share her story in the hope of securing a permanent place to stay. Alicia Foon has more.
A slightly cramped sleep out is what Crystal Brown calls home, as she faces a health and housing crisis at the same time.
I have stage 4 breast cancer. I was diagnosed with that last April last year.
It's a tight squeeze inside, with her double bed, a couch and coffee table, all that fits in. There's no bathroom either, so she has to traipse through the backyard to the main family house. She moved in late last year, after being forced to move out of a rental due to the owners moving back in. With just a month's notice, local charity NZ Gifts of Love and Strength found her the place until she finds something more permanent. The Ministry of Social Development was her first port of call, but despite being eligible for emergency housing, she wasn't able to move in with a pet.
Because I had this place, it's not an emergency, plus I had my cat with me, so I couldn't move into a housing corp emergency situation, which was going to be a motel. That was only a week-to-week basis. I couldn't take my cat with me and I won't leave him. They said, well, we can't help you then, so yeah. My cat, he's like my son. He pines without me. If I go out for the day, he'll cry. He's very, very close to me. And I won't give him up, not for nothing or no one.
She's taken matters into her own hands and has been looking for a pet-friendly rental in Christchurch. Ideally, it'll have a garden and 3 bedrooms so her best mate and eldest daughter can be her live-in palliative carers.
The rents out there are really expensive. They range from $370 to, I've seen others going for $900. Yeah, it's not cheap out there. Landlords need to put down their prices because they're pushing people out of homes.
It's been tough. Searching daily on TradeMe and property sites almost every hour since January has got her nowhere.
Housing out there is diabolical. I went and had a look at a place over in Hornby a while back and there was 80 applicants for that house.
She wants to be in a new place, surrounded by family before she begins chemo, and moving cities isn't an option.
I just want to be home. I want to be home amongst all my gear, with my family. I've got a daughter moving in with me, she's 30, and my best mate, Des, he's my rock and amongst all this. He's been there right through, so have my 2 daughters.
She says finding a place that will allow her to begin her healing and care means everything, as she grasps onto the hope of beating cancer.
That'll mean a lot, because, I'm not ready to give up yet. I don't want to give up. I've got 2 daughters that are telling me, don't give up yet, Mum. We've got this. They can't operate because the mess is too big. There'd be nothing left to sew together. Like I said, I've done some chemo, I can do some more, but I don't want to do any more while I'm here. I want to be home before I do that.
In a statement, the Ministry of Social Development says it's committed to helping Crystal, who gets the supported living payment and an accommodation supplement, and are now in touch about her search for private housing and her health. It says while MSD understands Crystal's cat is an important companion, having a pet can pose a problem for people needing housing, as it's up to landlords and accommodation providers whether or not they're allowed. For Checkpoint, this is Elisha Foon.
It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, if you are just joining us, some more information from the Ministry of Health on this positive COVID case for a worker at the airport, Auckland International Airport. This person's a cleaner and they work cleaning planes that have flown internationally from countries where COVID is widespread, so red zone countries. They are currently isolating at home after the positive test, and the Ministry of Health says that they will be transferred to the Auckland quarantine facility after they finish interviews with health officials. They have 5 household contacts. Now, those contacts have all been tested and returned negative test results, and close contacts through work are being identified, isolated and tested. They say at the moment there are 16 close contacts, but that number will likely change as they track further this person's movements. Now, Auckland Airport is their sole employment, and their role means that they're not mixing with the public. There are so far 3 locations of interest. Now, Ministry of Health says if you scanned in at the locations and you were there at the same time as this person, you'll be sent a notification via the app, right? But if not, here are the locations of interest. Westfield St Luke's Food Court, Saturday the 17th of April, and that was between 12:15 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. So St Luke's Food Court, Saturday just gone, 12:15 p.m. to 2:30. Bunnings New Lynn, same Saturday the 17th of April, between 2:30 and 3:50 p.m. And Movenpick on Dominion Road, that Saturday as well, 17th of April, from 5:15 p.m. to 7:20 p.m. Now, if you were at those places at that time, you are considered to be a casual contact. You should monitor your health and be aware of the symptoms of COVID-19. If you develop any symptoms, stay at home, contact Healthline and get a test, but you are considered a casual contact. Now, if you want to go back and check those details of the locations of interest, they are on the Ministry of Health website. Football fans are up in arms about plans for a breakaway Super League with some of Europe's top clubs, half of which are from England. Executives are being called greedy and are accused of spitting in the face of lovers of the game. That's according to the head of European football's governing body, who is threatening unprecedented bans. Here's the BBC's Andy Swiss.
They're 6 of England's biggest clubs in one of football's biggest shake-ups. Forming a new Super League with some of Europe's other giants could bring them even greater riches. But at what cost to the game? The new competition features England's so-called Big Six: Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester City and Manchester United, alongside leading clubs from Spain and Italy. What's proposed is a midweek competition with up to 20 clubs in total, and eventually a women's league as well. Why? Well, the clubs are unhappy with the structure of the Champions League, which Liverpool won just 2 years ago. They all want more money and a guaranteed place at Europe's top table.
These clubs want greater certainty in respect of their ability to qualify for competitions, to play against each other, to generate revenues and profits, but also to take control in terms of how the game is sold from a commercial point of view. This will result in the concentration of power and money in the hands of fewer and fewer clubs.
Well, the American owners here at Manchester United, the Glazer family, insist the Super League will open a new chapter for European football. Bringing together the greatest clubs and players throughout the season, they add, will ensure world-class competition. But elsewhere in the game, these plans have been met with an anger, the like of which football has rarely seen. Indeed, the Premier League say the proposals will destroy smaller clubs' dreams of climbing to the top, as Leicester famously did 5 years ago.
Competition is what football is about, and it allows Leicester to win the Premier League. It's self-anointed top clubs, don't forget, not by competitive achievement. And it undermines all of the principles that we teach children who come into our beautiful game about how you work hard in order to get your local community club promoted to the next level.
So what now? Well, the Super League teams want to carry on playing in their domestic leagues, but UEFA say their players could be banned, potentially even from the World Cup, while the government have also condemned the proposals.
Andy Swiss with that report. There are calls for Franz Josef emergency service buildings on top of the Alpine fault to be urgently moved after research has shown the probability of a devastating quake striking the South Island over the next 50 years has more than doubled. The study suggests a big quake could block South Island highways in more than 120 places, leave 10,000 people cut off and cost the economy about $10 billion. Alicia Foon has more.
When an earthquake happens, immediately drop, cover, hold.
These civil defence safety messages, more important than ever, following a study published by Victoria University, which found there's now a 75% chance of a major Alpine fault earthquake in the next 50 years. The Alpine fault is 850 kilometres long and runs up the western side of the South Island between Milford Sound and Marlborough. It poses one of the biggest natural threats to New Zealand. The most at-risk regions are Franz Josef on the west coast and the rest of the South Island. Even before this research, Westland Mayor Bruce Smith says council has been pushing for years for some of these key services, which sit directly on the fault line in Franz Joseph, to be moved, with little progress.
We've been working on it with the various parties. We've written to all of them, and we've been working on it for some time. And if this report does anything, it raises the need to act a little bit faster than councils and government departments seem to be able to achieve.
The report warns Franz Joseph will disappear into 8-metre-wide crevices. A Franz Joseph hotelier says it can't be left up to locals to potentially relocate emergency services and building owners positioned on top of the Alpine fault.
People have invested heavily amounts of money, can't just afford to walk away with their buildings, etc. They've got mortgages, etc. on those buildings. You know, the council issued permits for a number of years to build on the fault line.
The wider West Coast would also be hit hard and potentially be cut off for weeks or even months. Grey District Mayor Tanya Gibson says it's not a surprise, but this could prompt a funding boost to help them better prepare.
If there's a big emergency on the West Coast, and we still haven't really made a lot of ground due to funding in those areas, so I think that we really need to be seriously looking at those sorts of things. We need to make sure that, you know, we've got some funding from the PGF, which we're bringing up our ports infrastructure up to a better level. So it's all those things that we've been looking at.
It also found an 82% chance the quake will be greater than magnitude 8. The government has prepared a response team called Project AF8, which stands for Alpine Fault Magnitude 8. It's a collaboration between the Wellington Civil Defence Emergency Management Groups and partner organisations. They've come up with a detailed coordinated response plan for the first 7 days following a severe Alpine fault quake. AF8 project chair Brian Patton says he's assumed it would be a magnitude 8, but what's changed is the urgency.
There's a whole heap of issues that an AF8 fault rupture raises, really, and Franz Joseph is unfortunate in having the fault line going right through it. But I guess the research is saying that actually the urgency and the need to do this is far greater than what a lot of people may have thought in the past.
He says people shouldn't just rely on local authorities and that households and community groups, churches and marae need a survival plan. When asked if the government would help cover the cost of relocating homes and businesses within these quake danger zones, the Acting Minister for Civil Defence, Chris Farfoy's office, redirected these questions to local mayors and government ministers, the Energy and Resource Minister and the Minister of Infrastructure. For Checkpoint, this is Elisha Foon.
Before 6, a bit more feedback on the golf course in Rotorua. This person says, I've been in Rotorua my whole life. Nowhere is it more apparent the divide between the house wealthy and poor living in motels. I suggest those against the golf course being developed for housing go visit Fenton Street, MSD Mile, which is our main street.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatao at DNA. Australia's Health Minister Greg Hunt says the latest positive case here won't mean a change to Trans-Tasman travel rules. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the border worker, who was reported positive this afternoon, cleans planes which arrive from red zone countries. She says the latest community case of COVID-19 is a reminder that there is still a small chance those vaccinated can contract the coronavirus. Mr Hunt says his government has full confidence in New Zealand's health system.
The advice I have from the Chief Medical Officer is they're watching New Zealand, but that they have high confidence that New Zealand has this in train. And of course, given that the worker has been vaccinated, that will play into how they assess the case and the transmission capability.
Greg Hunt says there will also be days ahead when there are positive cases in Australia. The Ministry of Health says 16 close contacts of the border worker have been identified so far. It says 5 household contacts have been tested and have returned negative tests. 3 locations of interest have been identified so far. Anyone who was at Westfield St Luke's Food Court, Bunnings, Newlyn and Movenpick Dominion Road on Saturday afternoon should monitor their health and get a test if they develop COVID-19 symptoms. The Housing Minister says the government made a technical error when purchasing land at Ihumatao. The Auditor-General has ruled the $30 million deal illegal because the money the government used didn't get the right approvals. Megan Woods will now have to explain the error to Parliament and then pass retrospective legislation to make the deal legal. Ms Woods says while it's not ideal, it is a mere technical error.
This is a technical error that happens from time to time, but it's not unusual. This happened 71 times in the last 5 years of the previous government, totalling $500 million. It certainly isn't the way anyone strives to do things, but it does happen.
Megan Wood says the mistake will likely be rectified when the budget is announced next month. A man who was once a suspect in the killing of Teresa Cormack has had convictions he received because of that association quashed. Today, the Court of Appeal cleared Wayne Montepierto of child kidnapping charges. In 1988, he was convicted of kidnapping 4 children in Flaxmere in 1986. Police interest in Mr Montepierto was reignited because of the 1987 kidnapping and murder of 6-year-old Teresa. In 2008, it emerged a juror had been told Mr Montepierto was a suspect in the Teresa Cormack case, and that information was shared with other jurors. The judgment says in the juror's opinion the jury had been influenced by this. The Court of Appeal today allowed the appeal and quashed the convictions. Minneapolis and other US cities have bolstered security as they brace for possible violence. A jury has adjourned for the night after considering its verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer charged with murdering George Floyd. Barbed wire and National Guard troops are protecting the court. Hundreds of protesters have been marching through the city. If convicted of second-degree murder, Derek Chauvin could face up to 40 years in prison. The National Party is standing by its role in the Transmission Gully project despite a scathing review that found it was set up to fail. The report found the maximum price the government would pay was set too low. Transmission Gully was the first motorway in New Zealand to be delivered under a PPP model set up under the national government in 2012. National's transport spokesperson Michael Woodhouse says the fact the project costs much more than originally planned lies with the current government. It was supposed to cost $850 million, but the budget now sits beyond $1.25 billion. Advocates for first-time buyers say big increases in the price of entry-level houses outside the main centres show how hard it is to get onto the property ladder. The latest QV quartile index shows the average price of houses at the lower end of the market has jumped by 70% in Ruapehu, the biggest increase in the country. In Bulla, the increase was 55%, and in Southland it was 47%. Leslie Harris from the First Time Buyers Club says the figures are not a surprise.
Those areas skyrocketing in that lower quartile is just a symptom of people are having to buy, way outside of the traditional centres in order to actually even get onto the property ladder in the first place.
In the main centres, the biggest increases were in Hutt City, Napier and Palmerston North. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. A former Olympian says some gymnastics coaches are feeling battered and bruised after a review into the sport. An independent review of Gymnastics New Zealand was undertaken following accusations of abuse in the sport. TriStar Gymnastics General Manager David Phillips, who competed at the 2000 Olympics, says while there's been plenty of agreement around the review's findings and it has been empowering for athletes, that's not the case for all involved.
The coaches in the review probably feel a bit battered and bruised, and I think in some cases that's appropriate, and in other cases not so much, and so it's just kind of supporting them through the review recommendations. But I think by and large really positive response too, because maybe there was an appetite for change that existed there anyway.
David Phillips says cultural change in the sport will only come slowly. The International Cricket Council is confident the Indian team will be allowed to travel to England this summer, despite India's addition to Britain's red list of locations from which most travel is banned due to a high number of COVID-19 cases. India is scheduled to play New Zealand in the World Test Championship final in June and a 5-test series against England starting in August. The Gabba Stadium is set to get $1 billion rebuild as part of Brisbane's bid for the 2032 Olympics. Brisbane is the preferred bidder for the Games and could be confirmed as host as early as July. As part of the Gabba's rebuild, its capacity will be boosted from 42,000 to 50,000. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our window on the world asks if it's time to ditch the plough for the sake of the planet. Hopefully not to recycle it into a weapon. Tony Stamp samples Taylor Swift's recycled second album. And our mathematician Dylan Mayhew is taking a round trip, or at least calculating the shortest path between 2 points on a surface, when that surface just happens to be a sphere. On nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Rain spreading south tonight, heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Easing to showers tomorrow morning with fine breaks developing. For the rest of the North Island, also Marlborough, Nelson and Buller. Scattered rain spreading south tonight, possibly heavy about Nelson, turning to showers tomorrow with possible thunderstorms about the central North Island in the afternoon. Westland and Fiordland, cloud clearing tomorrow morning to fine weather, but showers continuing for Fiordland. Canterbury, Otago and Southland fine with high cloud. A few showers developing in the south tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands fine tonight. Cloudy tomorrow with rain developing around midday. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint, and I'm Lisa Owen. Winston Peters has been back in court today, appealing the decision made last year where he was ordered to pay over $300,000. It all goes back to a leak to the media in 2017, which revealed the former Deputy Prime Minister was overpaid $18,000 in superannuation over 7 years. Harry Locke was at the Court of Appeal today.
The overpayment happened after Winston Peters didn't tick a box about having a partner, and all the money has since been repaid. But after details were leaked, Mr Peters took top public servants and 2 national MPs, who had been ministers at the time, to the High Court, claiming his privacy had been breached. In the judgment released last April, Justice Fenning agreed there was a breach of his privacy. But he also said Mr Peters could not establish that any of the defendants were responsible for the leak and ordered Mr Peters to pay over $300,000 in costs. This is what Mr Peters had to say at the time.
It's about the privacy of anyone who's had their rights breached in this matter. It's a foundation stone of our society and of democracy, and without it, we look forward to a very bleak future as a country. So it's a serious issue and it's worth defending.
The appeal over that decision began today, with Justices French, Goddard and Collins presiding. Brian Henry, representing the former Deputy Prime Minister, turned attention to the fact ministers were told about the case in the first place. He says breaches of privacy occurred when the top officials at the Ministry of Social Development, Brendan Boyle, and the State Services Commission, Peter Hughes, briefed their respective ministers about what had happened, Antoli and Paula Bennett. He says that personal information should never have been divulged.
All they're doing in our submission is providing to a minister salacious information that the minister can do nothing with and does not assist the minister in the administration of MSD.
Mr Henry told the court all New Zealanders are entitled to that guarantee of privacy, and only in the case of fraud should ministers be given the identity of individuals. He questions why ministry chief executives felt the need to tell their ministers.
Mr English, he was the Prime Minister when this thing blew up, came out and said it's too personal for ministers to know. That was what he stated, and he's right. It's too personal for a minister to know. That's our point. You're stepping across a huge divide when you leave the responsible civil service to elected officials.
But Victoria Casey, QC, on behalf of the Ministry of Social Development, refutes this.
They were concerned that the minister needed to be aware of this issue so that they would be in a position to assure their colleagues and, if necessary, the House and, if necessary, the public through the media, that they had been assured that appropriate processes had been followed.
She says the public servants wanted to be able to prove Mr Peters had not been granted special treatment because of his status and power. And Ms Casey criticises the plaintiff for not bringing up this argument in the initial High Court case.
You've heard again this morning, we are now turning back to this was salacious. He goes so far as to say the evidence given by Mr Boyle and Mr Hughes as to why they briefed their ministers was fallacious. False, Your Honours. That was not put to Mr Hughes or Mr Boyle in the High Court trial either.
The appeal is also looking at how the details about the superannuation overpayment made it to the press. Mr Peters' lawyer, Mr Henry, is holding the Ministry of Social Development responsible.
What we're saying is that MSD, by the very nature of the information, has it absolutely in their control. So The fact it's got from that control into the public, the inference is somewhere it has been breached.
But Justice Goddard interrogated whether MSD is culpable.
You're saying to us, on the balance of probabilities, that this agency is responsible for the breach. So the question then becomes, well, what's the evidence to support that? And there are various other government departments which held the information from which it could have come.
The appeal will continue tomorrow with a reserved judgment. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
The National Party is defending its role in the transmission Gully following a scathing review that found the project was flawed from the get-go. An interim review into the 27-kilometre highway has found serious flaws at the planning stage of the Public-Private Partnership Project, or PPP, along with a lack of transparency. Transmission Gully was the first motorway in New Zealand set for a public-private partnership model set up under the national government in 2012. Labor says they are now having to clean up the mess. Our political reporter Charlie Drever filed this report.
Wellington's controversial billion-dollar highway through Transmission Gully has been given the green light, but it's not yet clear who'll pay.
A decade on from that story, and Transmission Gully is still controversial and still not built. The road was supposed to be completed last April, but was delayed by more than a year because of significant re-estimation of earthwork requirements, storm events, the Kaikoura earthquake and COVID-19. However, a report commissioned last year after the Transport Agency had to fork out more than $200 million to get it back on track, found the project was flawed from the start. The Transport Minister, Michael Wood, says the planning, governance and oversight of the project was clearly lacking.
The fact this project was proceeded with on a non-PPP basis but jammed into a PPP model, the fact that the affordability threshold, which is how much the government was willing to pay for the project, was described by bidders as, quote, dubious and, quote, demonstrably unrealistic. All of these things reveal that this was a very poorly conceived process, that it didn't have leadership from the government at the time.
Green Party Transport spokesperson Julianne Genter says her party said from the beginning National was underestimating the cost.
PPPs have been sold as being more efficient and saving costs, but there's no real evidence that they do. In fact, this is just one more piece of evidence that it's actually very difficult for the public sector to transfer the risk and cost to the private sector. And ultimately, it's the public that ends up paying the cost.
Both Julianne Genter and Michael Wood made it clear who they thought was to blame.
The National Party and the National Transport Minister at the time really need to take full responsibility for dodgy assumptions that were used to try to get the project over the line looking cheaper than eventually it was going to be.
Stephen Joyce writes a very long column in the weekend papers every weekend opining about a range of issues. He might like to address these issues in the next one.
RNZ contacted Stephen Joyce, who says he oversaw the selection of Transmission Gully as a project for the Roads of National Significance programme, but the PPP was set up after he left the portfolio. The minister after him was Jerry Brownlee. National's current transport spokesperson, Michael Woodhouse, stands by National's actions in 2012.
At least the previous government got things done, and in 5 months' time, Wellington will have Transmission Gully, a project that's been talked about for over 60 years. It's going to be a reality very soon.
And he hit back at the report's comments on the PPP.
The report makes some quite outrageous comments that imply that the contractors were forced into signing up to a contract. If they were not satisfied with the terms of the arrangement at $850 million, they should not have put ink to paper.
The project has ballooned from $850 million to $1.25 billion. But Woodhouse says costs would have increased anyway because of inflation, speed changes and COVID.
It's not appropriate, I think, to sheet all of that cost increase home at the fact that this was a public-private partnership. Sometimes costs do escalate. The cost that shouldn't have escalated is the nearly $200 million that they paid when they were advised they shouldn't have.
Transmission Gully is due to finally be open to traffic by September. If not, the contractors face $250,000 a day in penalties. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Core Charlie Drever, DNA.
It is 16, oh no, actually I'll call it, it's 17 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Derek Chauvin's fate is now in the hands of a Minneapolis jury. The legal team for the former US police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck for about 9 minutes until he died argued in its closing statement that he acted as a reasonable officer. Yet the prosecution say he murdered the unarmed black man to protect his pride and ego. Minneapolis is on edge awaiting the verdict. Our correspondent Simon Marks has this report.
After 3 weeks of testimony and evidence furnished by 45 separate witnesses, in the end, the trial came down to one thing: that 9.5-minute videotape of George Floyd pinned to the ground beneath Derek Chauvin's knee, complaining that he couldn't breathe, onlookers urging Mr. Chauvin to show some humanity and check his suspect's condition. Prosecutors insist the jury can simply believe their eyes. It was, said lead prosecutor Jerry Blackwell, an open and shut case, so simple that even a 9-year-old bystander can be heard on the videotape trying to intervene.
When the 9-year-old girl said, "Get off of him," that's how simple it was. Get off of him. Common sense. Why is it necessary to continue applying deadly restraint to a man who is defenseless, who is handcuffed, who is not resisting, who is not breathing, who doesn't have a pulse, and to go on and do that for another 3+ minutes before the ambulance shows up, and then to continue doing it?
But the defence says the jury needs to bear in mind what led up to that devastating video. George Floyd high as a kite, using a counterfeit banknote to buy cigarettes, resisting police attempts to arrest him and place him in a squad car, scuffling with them violently, an opioid addict whom officers feared posed a threat to them and the community at large. Defence lawyer Eric Nelson.
In this case, the totality of the circumstances that were known to a reasonable police officer in the precise moment the force was used demonstrates that this was an authorized use of force, as unattractive as it may be. And this is reasonable doubt.
The argument that Derek Chauvin did everything by the book has been undercut by prosecution witnesses, including the police chief in Minneapolis. He testified there was no excuse for Mr. Chauvin's conduct. But the defence insists other issues: Mr. Floyd's pre-existing medical conditions, even exhaust pipe fumes from the police car could have caused his death. Outside the heavily protected courthouse, the Floyd family prayed for a conviction, and the Reverend Al Sharpton warned whatever the trial's outcome, the work to change America will need to continue.
Because many of us, whether it be in the Congress or in the streets, have kept this fight going, and we are going to keep the fight going. Whatever way this verdict goes, we won't stop till the laws change. Amen. And the behavior change.
There are fears about what lies ahead in the hours, maybe days to come. Minneapolis public schools are moving to entirely virtual classes, fearful of fury on the streets. National Guard and police are being reinforced, and it's not only in Minneapolis where the acquittal of Derek Chauvin could spark anger. At the White House, Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
We're in touch with local authorities, we're in touch with states, with governors, with mayors, and certainly, we will continue to encourage peaceful protests, but we're not going to get ahead of the verdict in the trial.
Not long to wait for that now. The judge told the jury not to be swayed in any way by anxiety over the potential consequences of their decision as this landmark case heads to its finale. For Checkpoint, I'm Simon Marks in Washington.
Australia's National Cabinet is poised to accelerate the vaccine rollout by offering vaccine doses to anyone over the age of 50 sooner than expected. But with less than half of all aged care homes residents yet to receive a single dose, some in the aged care sector are questioning when they will be treated as a priority. The ABC's Tom Lowry has more.
2 months ago, on February 21, Australia's vaccine rollout began when an 84-year-old aged care resident was administered the Pfizer vaccine. From the start, aged care was at the front of the vaccine queue.
We keep saying that they are the priority, but it needs to translate into
the rollout of the vaccine program. And at this stage, we're just not seeing that.
Sean Rooney is from Leading Age Services Australia, an industry body for the aged care sector.
8 weeks on, we're still seeing large numbers of older Australians in care not vaccinated, and certainly very few staff vaccinated.
As of yesterday, about 1,300 aged care facilities had received first doses of the vaccine. Just over 700 had received second doses. That's of roughly 2,500 centres nationwide.
This is the thing that keeps us awake at night. We've seen the catastrophic effect of widespread community transmission then translating into outbreaks in aged care homes.
And Sean Rooney says the rollout among aged care staff isn't moving fast either.
There's very few that have been vaccinated, and more often than not, that's either they've gone to their own GP to be vaccinated, or they've had a vaccine that had been left over from when residents have been vaccinated.
Yesterday, National Cabinet met to discuss how to reset the troubled rollout. The answer seems to be go bigger, faster. Here's the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison.
National Cabinet further agreed in principle to a series of changes to the strategy that will be put forward for final approval at our meeting later this week. This includes options to bring forward the commencement of vaccinations for over 50s under Priority Group 2A and to establish readiness across the states and territories to operate vaccination sites from additional sites to mass vaccination sites as we move through the year.
The big change there is making the vaccine available to anyone over 50 much sooner than planned. It could be rubber-stamped by National Cabinet as soon as Thursday. It's a change some states have been pressing for, urging the federal government to get AstraZeneca doses into the community as quickly as possible.
2.9 million people in New South Wales are 50 years and over, and I think whilst we do have supply there, we should get the dose out to as many people as possible because that gives protection to our population.
That's the Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian. She's also calling for a shift in how we think about the virus and how we tolerate it.
We don't measure every year the number of people that get the flu. However, we do measure or think about how many people have to be hospitalised because of the flu, and perhaps that's an approach we need to take to COVID moving forward because we know the virus is going to be around for some time. We're going to have to live with it.
Sean Rooney is happy to see as many people vaccinated as soon as possible, but he just wants to know when those who are supposed to be at the front of the queue will get their priority treatment.
The more people vaccinated, the better, because that would provide more protections. But for an aged care worker who's been told that they are a priority and you're in 1A, yet they're not hearing what the plan is for their vaccination, I would imagine, and I hear regularly that they're going, well, what about me?
And that report was by Tom Lowry in Canberra. The campaign to vaccinate against COVID-19 has been slow to take off in Europe, dogged by delays in supply. And as the infection rate rises again across the continent, some people have begun looking abroad for a vaccine. Over the past week, about 50 vaccine tourists have travelled to Moscow from Germany for their first dose of the Russian jab. The BBC's Sarah Rainsford met up with them in Moscow.
On the cobblestones of Red Square, a redhead snaps selfies in front of the Kremlin clock tower. In life before COVID, you couldn't move here for tourists. Now Enno Lenze has plenty of space to get the best shots. But he's in Moscow for more than a photo op. He's flown in from Germany to get vaccinated against the coronavirus.
It's a pandemia. Yeah, so I saw all the zombie movies. I know how it ends.
Enno tells me Germany's vaccine rollout is scarily slow. His 70-year-old father still hasn't been done, and he has no idea when his own turn's coming. Hunting online for an alternative, he stumbled across vaccine tours to Russia and signed up.
Not that I like to support the system or anything here, but I get a vaccination here and I don't get it in Germany. So at the end, the vaccination situation for me is better here, and that's really sad.
Around 50 vaccine tourists have flown in over the past week to get their first jab of Sputnik V in a small hotel conference room. Among them were father and son in matching black shirts. Dad, Daniel, has a heart problem and he's been shielding most of the year. So this trip to Moscow broke cover pretty dramatically.
So this is a big deal for you, coming not only out of the house but out of the country.
Yes.
Russia's claims for Sputnik were so big and bold at the start that many in the West saw it as more of a political tool than a real pandemic beater. The politics do remain, but the vaccine has proved it works.
We believe in this, but we will also believe in anything else. So when we
take any vaccine.
We take any vaccine.
It was never a matter of what kind of vaccine we would ever take. It's just when we can take the first one. And since Sputnik is the first vaccine that we're able to take, so we're going to take the risk of flying to Moscow and taking it here.
The doctor checked me for all illnesses and I confirmed that I'm not ill, don't have like asthma.
Finally, it's Enno's turn. A quick jab in the arm and it's all done.
And Sarah Rainsford with that story from Moscow. NASA has declared a new chapter in space exploration after a successful test flight of a helicopter drone on Mars. The agency has even called it its Wright brothers moment. As the BBC's Rebecca Morrell reports, the helicopter called Ingenuity was airborne for about 40 seconds.
It was a flight that lasted just 40 seconds. But by hovering in the Martian air, turning and then landing, NASA's Ingenuity helicopter made history.
Confirm that Ingenuity has performed its first flight.
And this was the moment Mission Control learnt of the success.
Human beings have never flown a rotorcraft outside of our own Earth's atmosphere. We don't have to say it anymore. Human beings have flown a rotorcraft on another planet. And we have started it by flying at Mars. So it's a huge deal for humanity.
The helicopter took pictures too, capturing its own shadow below, and another just before it touched down. Until now, NASA had no guarantees this would work. These flights are testing cutting-edge technology. On board are solar panels and a thermostat, so the helicopter can survive temperatures down to minus 80 degrees. For each flight, scientists upload a plan, but Ingenuity also has to make decisions by itself. High-tech cameras and sensors can spot obstacles, so it can adjust its height to avoid these. But the helicopter can also use these features as landmarks, so it can navigate its way down to the ground. This flight is just the start. In the coming days, the helicopter will begin to fly further afield, and it could transform our view of Mars.
Helicopters can cover more ground, can act as scout vehicles, can go into different areas that the rover can't go to, and then they can do coordinated science data. Future manned missions to Mars can utilize a drone helicopter. So there's a lot of opportunity.
More than 100 years ago, the Wright brothers made history with the first powered aircraft on Earth. Now, a little Mars helicopter has shown the same is possible on another planet, propelling us into a new era of space exploration.
And that was Rebecca Morrell reporting. If you're just tuning in, locations of interest for the latest COVID case: Westfield St Luke's Food Court, Bunnings New Lynn and Movenpick Dominion Road. Log on to the Ministry of Health's website to get the times, locations of interest it's under. We are back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Australia's health minister says the latest COVID case here and a vaccinated border worker won't mean